Welcome to our 64th podcast. Today we'll be talking about neurodiversity in the workplace with our special guest, Mary Pat Kochenash, founder of Flip the Switch, which is an education and advocacy organization for neurodiverse populations of all ages in education and in the workplace. What's one thing you can do now to support neurodiverse colleagues at work? Keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces.
Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. As always, we're so glad to have you here with us. My name is Rich Cruz. I'm an organizational development consultant, and I'm here with my colleagues, Ben Kleinman, Ben, and Cheryl Volpe.
Oh, button. Oh my gosh.
Ben's the silent partner to this morning. And Cheryl Volpe. Hey, Cheryl.
Hey, Rich. Hi, everyone.
And we have a very special guest with us today. Hi, Mary Pat. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks. Nice to be here.
So Mary Pat is going to be talking with us about neurodiversity in the workplace. Is that right?
That's correct.
I've been looking forward to this because there's so much discussion about neurodiverse populations. In fact, we had a guest on not too long ago, Jen Adelhart, who did a TEDx on this, and it's something that we need to talk more about. So, Mary Pat, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. So I'm an occupational therapist of 30 plus years. And occupational therapy, just for everybody out there, focuses on rehabilitation for the occupations of life. That's where the term comes from. So I work with all ages, all environments, helping disabled people get back to their occupations at whatever age. And so half my training is in physical disabilities and half my training was in mental health. And I worked 10 years with adults, and then I worked 15, 20 years with children in the schools. And what I discovered was there was a lot of good new neuroscience information out there about how human beings are, much less how they learn and survive. And particularly if they're disabled, that when I retired from schools, I wanted to get the information out there. And what I found was it doesn't just apply to schools, it applies to parents and absolutely workplaces. And in addition to that, I have 3 children, all of whom were diagnosed what we call neurodivergent in their teen years, 2 with ADHD and 1 with autism. And they know that I mentioned this. I like to put that out there.
Sure.
So that kind of helped my journey in helping them navigate the world, my own profession, and kind of came together to create Flip the Switch.
Right on. Okay.
Mary Pat, before we get too far down the road, can you help people understand, and me especially understand, how people use the term neurodivergent?
Yes, it's a great question, and I was going to add that. So when we say neurodiverse applies to everyone because we all have our own individual nervous system. So when you talk about the workplace, neurodiversity in the workplace absolutely fits. But the term neurodivergent applies to people who kind of diverge from for lack of a better word, the typical neurotype. We begin to say, what's your neurotype? So are you neurotypical or are you neurodivergent, which would include autistic people, and autistic people most people prefer the term autistic rather than on the spectrum or having autism. People with ADHD, learning disabled, people with a head injury, anything that changes the way they learn or move through the world.
Got it. Okay.
And with that,
Thank you.
And would some conditions, and forgive me if that's not the right term, but such as bipolar disorder and those types of conditions also fall in that under
yes,
that?
yes,
Okay, very good.
absolutely.
And can you remind well, actually, can you just let the audience know? So, Cheryl, you met Mary Pat, right?
I
Very
did.
recently?
I did. Mary Pat and I met through BW&ICE, which is Business Women Networking, including charity and education, which our chapter is led by Hillary Spivak here in Bucks County. And the presentation that Mary Pat gave us, each of us take turns presenting to the group every month, and it's been a great experience. And that's where I first met Pat and had the opportunity to be enlightened to the framework that she presented in her presentation. So thrilled to have you here, Mary Pat. So thank you
And
again for joining.
girl, it's
Awesome.
been great meeting you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, can you, so you wrote a book, is that right?
No, I didn't write a book.
Oh, you didn't write a book. Okay. But your practice is Flip the Switch.
Yeah, so the
And
practice flip the switch, and I do have a series of presentations
there you go.
that I will give to whoever will listen at this point. And what I am putting together is a course, because this course provides education. It's an 8-module course with things that you can do in your school environment from a nervous system perspective to help your learners at the beginning of their school trajectory. What I
Oh,
discovered working as an AT in the schools was we come in often too late trying to fix things, like something called executive function skill, if you're familiar with them. Or if there's a suicide in the district, it's let's bring in coping skills. And
mhm.
what I found is there's so many things going on in education nowadays, but we don't accommodate the nervous systems of young learners, and that impacts their mental health trajectory as they go through school. So if you are my children were all undiagnosed neurodivergent,
Mm.
and they were able to make it through the school system up to a certain point when the accommodation they weren't receiving for their nervous systems kind of began to impact them, and they began to flounder. But that was because they were undiagnosed. But there are undiagnosed neurodivergent students all throughout school, and teachers need to know what they look like, how they learn, that kind of thing. So I am putting together on my website course, an online course, and that would take a little more time to go through all of it, but that's kind
Sure.
of where I'm heading with that.
I would imagine, is it correct? Like there's got to be so many people in the workforce who have gone undiagnosed, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And just like in a typical classroom, a workforce is set up for neurotypical people.
Mhm.
And I said, when I speak, I'm speaking from a nervous system basis too, not just a psychological basis.
Sure.
Because what underlies psychology or social emotional growth is the nervous system. And in the schools, SEL or social emotional learning is a big term. We love to throw it around, and it's big for the last 10 years, but most programs don't take into account the nervous system for all humans, for all people, and how we, our fight or flight response, how it guides how we learn, how we process the world. So, absolutely. That's why and just knowing that can help a teacher maybe identify a child that's learning different or doesn't necessarily feel neurologically safe in the classroom.
Does the neurodiversity and the ways that people's nervous system interpret or process a situation so that they can feel psychologically present or even psychologically safe vary as well?
Yes. Yes. So it's individual almost. So and so there's something underneath that psychological safety, and it's referred to as felt safety.
Okay.
Okay. So that is you before you even realize there may be a threat in your environment, which would happen in your thinking brain. Okay.
Mhm.
Your body is processing your 8 senses, because we have 8 senses, and it's determining if you are neurologically safe. And that's different for everybody, and it's completely subjective. And
Mm.
if your body determines that through what's called your autonomic nervous system in your brain, then it will send a signal to your thinking brain, and then your thinking brain will feel psychologically unsafe. But it all happens at a lower level of the nervous system without your awareness. Your body will not inform you until it thinks it's a problem. And the determination of a problem is based on your nervous system, your memories, what your nervous system knows, and what it references. Has nothing to do with that, whether you're actually physically safe.
Mm.
When we
Okay.
have young children and they'll express a concern about something and we'll say, oh, don't worry about that. It's nothing to worry about. When in essence, their body is telling them that it is.
Right.
And so kind of understanding that and that's for all humans, whether you're neurodivergent or not. So it impacts everybody in school, in a workplace. If you're a manager and someone sits down to get their review, their felt safety is probably at that point compromised. And when your
Mm.
felt safety is compromised, the interesting thing is your thinking brain goes a little bit offline because your
Oh,
body, that's how your body's designed is to, if you're in a real fight or flight situation, you don't need your brain, you need your heart, you need your lungs, you need your legs to get out of that situation. So your body's designed to shut down your thinking brain. You've all had the experience of you have an argument with someone and then you walk away and you're like, oh, I should have said that. That's
Mhm.
because when you're having the argument, your brain's a little bit shut down because your fight or flight is all ramped up. And then you walk away and your body's natural recovery system comes in and you're like, and your thinking brain opens up nice and wide and you're like, that's what I should have done. So that's a process that's going on all
nice.
the time for everybody.
Okay. Okay. I got to ask real quick, but because we do need to take a break in a second, but you said 8 senses?
Yes.
I'm like,
I was gonna ask
I
that
was
too.
like 5. Wow.
Now, this is so cool because I'm a neuroscience nerd. So besides the 5 that you know about, you have 3 hidden senses essentially. One is a long term called proprioception, but it's actually in your muscles and your joints. And there's sensors in there that send information to your brain 24/7. So your brain knows how to operate those muscles and joints. You don't have to think about, okay, I'm contracting my stomach muscles to hold me upright against gravity while I have this conversation with Mary Pat. Your body's taking care of that. And that's a result of the information it's getting from those muscles and joint sensors. The next one is your vestibular system. That's in your inner ear. That gives you a sense of where you are in relation to gravity. Am I sitting still? Am I moving forward? Am I spinning around? And the
Oh,
last one, the 8th one, is something called interoception, and it's your inner body sense. So it's telling you at all times, are you hungry? Are you tired? Do you need to move? Are you getting sick? Are you getting a temperature? Is there bacteria in your body building up somewhere? All that information is going into your brain from all those 8 senses 24/7. And what your brain does is it kind of processes it, files away what you may not need to pay attention to at that time, and keeps present what you need to do the task you're doing. But sometimes there's glitches in there. A lot of young children don't develop that as quickly, so they may get to school and be fidgety, or there's all sorts of ramifications of that process. But that process feeds into telling your brain and your body if you are neurologically safe at all times. Your brain will assess all that information and compare it to your memories and things like that in a fraction of a second to determine if you are safe. So that's where
got
the
it.
ACEs come in.
And is that safety component, is that, we hear people refer to the amygdala or the reptilian brain. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Yes. And it's easier to explain in parts of the 3 brain, like the reptilian brain. The amygdala is your middle brain, your emotional brain,
Oh,
and then your front is your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex. And
prefrontal
that's
cortex.
kind of how that works. It's really not as simple as that. Really, they're all connected, but it's a little bit easier to understand it that way. Yes.
Got it. Okay. Well, we need to take a quick break, but when we come back, can we put all of this into the context of the workplace?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. We'll be right back.
Meet Hermie the HR Hermit Crab. Laugh, learn, and lead better with Hermie. Hermie is here to tackle workplace madness with heart and humor from Harmonious Workplaces. He's perfect for HR pros, leaders, and change makers. Hermie teaches workplace lessons through cartoons and is great for team discussions and workshops. Get your copy on Amazon now. www.hermiehrhermitcrab.com. Again, that's hermiehrhermitcrab.com.
And we're back. So we have been talking about neurodiversity, specifically neurodivergent populations, right? And Mary Pat, we thought we would bring the conversation now into the workplace, right? So you've worked in schools and in the workplace, right? So
That's
um,
a hospital.
in a hospital, okay, yeah. So can you help us to understand, like, how can we use this neuroscience to create a better workplace?
Well, I think the first place to start is understanding that there is the neuroscience. That I like to say in the school environment, but it's the same for adults or wherever you are. All behavior comes from the nervous system, comes from neurology. In our culture, it's a culture of compliance, and we tend to think of behavior often as a choice we make. And it's really not. It's based on our body's determination of safety and threat. Now, as human beings, there's a theory out there. I'm just going to throw this out there because I don't want you to think I'm talking, out on my own. It's a theory called polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. And that's what a lot of this work is based on. But that as human beings, we are wired from the minute we're born evolutionarily to connect with people, because that's how we stay safe. That's how we thrive. So our bodies only really know two states. To simplify all the fight or flight talk, they know safety and connection. If neurologically safe, then we can connect, which we're biologically supposed to do to thrive. Or if we determine a threat, then our body goes into protection mode. Now, when we go into protection mode, there's 4 states. There's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Okay? The 4th one was discovered a couple of years ago. And I think it's important when talking about the workplace to talk about them real quickly because they impact everyone's behavior. So if you're in a state of fight and your body chooses where to go when it feels under threat, based on its history, based on the circumstances, based on the person or people involved, your body determines whether you're going to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. If you go into fight, you can become aggressive. You can become verbally aggressive. You can become agitated. If you go into flight, you can become avoidant. You can become a little bit shut down. Maybe you're not doing your work the way you're supposed to be doing. And if you go into freeze, then you really go into shutdown. Your body's like, this is just too much for me, and goes into shutdown. Or my personal favorite, fawn. Because fawn is when you're so anxious that you will do whatever you can to people please people so that your own nervous system feels better. I was so delighted to discover this one because I'm a fawner. And it really explained how I operate. So and people pleasing always makes everybody happy, right? Because everybody's getting pleased, but you're not. And your nervous system is continuing to be dysregulated, which can lead to your burnout at work. So in a workplace environment with neurotypical people, that alone is enough to know that this state exists. And everybody that comes into your office had experiences before they got there in the morning that could have totally dysregulated them. You're getting kids out and they were all late. Okay, so you get into the office place and your nervous system is just ramped up. You're in a state of fight or flight. No matter who you are, that happens to us all. And it's good, I think, as a manager to kind of be aware of that, to be aware that whatever behavior someone might be handing you is coming from not just necessarily their choice. We all know the experience, you'll be with someone and they'll come in and they're all ramped up and you begin to feel yourself get ramped up. Because the interesting thing is your vibe is my vibe. As human beings, we are wired to vibe together. And that's another thing. If you want a harmonious workplace, You want nervous systems that are kind of vibing together. My vibe is your vibe, that kind of thing. And that happened at a neurological level before it's going to happen at the other level. So then you can take this same science and you can look at the people, there may be people neurodivergent or diverging from that typical path in your workplace. They may be diagnosed and have a diagnosis, or they may not. Yeah.
Sure.
And it's important to realize that and to realize some of the attributes of neurodivergent people. For years, we have not really understood who they are. I know when my own kids were diagnosed, I was flabbergasted by the amount of information that was out there. A lot of it was stereotypical and not correct. And a lot of it wasn't expansive. It wasn't complete. Every person who has ADHD or autism is a person who has ADHD or is autistic. They're an individual in their own right. But there are
Sure.
characteristics to certain of those neurotypes. So we would call ADHD a neurotype. We would call autism or being autistic a neurotype.
Sure.
And with ADHD, people with ADHD, their nervous systems function from a biochemical level to be interest-based. Okay? So if they have a deadline, if it's urgent, if it's a new thing, their biochemicals come together and they can attend and they can focus. If the work begins to get remote or rote and a little bit boring, then it's a harder job for them to get the chemicals together to focus. Okay? That is not a character flaw. That is a neurological trait. Okay? If people who are autistic, and I had to give a little bit of a qualifier here when I said before that a lot of people with autism like to be referred to as autistic. That doesn't apply to everybody. So if you meet an autistic person, it's okay to say to them, do you prefer your autism to be on the spectrum, or do you prefer to be called autistic? A lot of autistic people feel they don't want to be separated from their autism. It makes them who they are, and they don't want to be cured or changed. They just want to be understood and accommodated if they need to be accommodated.
Sure.
Which I know for businesses is a whole nother deal. In schools, you kind of have to do that. But most autistic people coming out and asking, who are diagnosed, coming out and asking them that was a good way to start. And autistic people often need to do something called stimming. You probably all heard of the stereotypical child that may flap their hand, and it's often uncomfortable for them to give eye contact. Those can be traits that are part of an autistic neurotype. And if an autistic person is working in an environment where that necessarily is not approved or understood, they do something called masking, which is they try to be neurotypical. They try not to do whatever stim behavior helps them regulate. But the problem with that is it leads to burnout and mental health issues, because they'll get home at night and be totally exhausted because all day they've not only been doing their job, but they've been masking against their neurotype, and it's exhausting. So if you have an environment where an autistic person is allowed to walk around, or they may, flap or twitch their fingers, and nobody's going to think anything of it. If they don't give you eye contact, that's not an indicator that they don't have good people skills necessarily. That's an indicator that they have divergent people skills. And doesn't necessarily need a judgment, but needs curiosity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And speaking of curiosity, is there a way for workplaces to better understand, like, is there some training or something like that that's available for managers to be able to identify, or if not identify, because they can't diagnose, right? But, to get to know who is neurodivergent and how they can best manage them. So I haven't seen anything like that. I don't know about anybody else in the call here, but
Right. So, so my company's new, and I started out focusing on education. So getting into the workplace is new for me. I had people tell me, but what do you want to go in the workplace? They're not going to want to listen to you, et cetera, et cetera. But my own 3 children are now young adults, and they had challenges in the workplace. And I think if certain things were understood, it would make it easier.
Sure.
So that's why I said, no, I'm going to focus on whoever will listen, and meeting Cheryl and talking to people. I've spoken 3 times now at business groups with really good reception. People were really interested and wanted to know. So my point of that is I don't necessarily have the resources. I'm discovering them as we go along. I did find one thing from LinkedIn called the Neurodiversity Education Academy, NEA, and they had a curriculum that I'm now using with my son. That's very, very helpful. They're out of Scandinavia, and there's a lot of good work coming from out of there. So I'm building resources as we go. I think this is a growing field. I think generally companies do want to do this. I'm sure there are more people out there, and I am happy to, if you ever want to get together and help research this, we can. I just kind of stumbled on that one. There's also a book. I have it somewhere. I don't go get it, by a gentleman who is a human resources person out of England. I always recommend this. And he wrote a book which characterized every single disability that he had ever encountered, and kind of gave a little bit of a cheat sheet. So I can't remember the name of it right now, but I can give it to you later. And don't you put it in the notes or something like that?
Yeah, we could definitely do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because
That's-
I have it right over there. I just don't want to get up and find it.
Yeah, sure.
But I can share that with you, and that gives you kind of like a little bit of a basis to go from. There are people out there doing it. I've started to share, I'm not the best person for social media, but I've started to get a little bit of people through my LinkedIn that are doing it. So I connect to them, and I'm happy to share resources with Harmonious Workplaces as I get them.
Oh, fantastic.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And you will emerge as a leader in this, because, like you said, you're not finding it in one big pile somewhere. You are leading that, and you will be among those colleagues that are amassing that information so that others can find it.
Thank you. I hope so. That's my goal. Whoever will listen.
I'm wondering maybe if we take another break, and then when we come back, would it be okay if we talked a little bit about how managers, since Mary Pat, you've just described a little bit about how managers can recognize some of these things, or at least first step you said is to just be aware that there is a neural system and that people may be responding differently based on their internal wiring, and then starting to recognize some hallmarks or traits of people who might be neurodivergent. But then maybe we could talk a little bit about how managers can take that and then maximize the contributions of everyone on their team, whether they are neurotypical or neurodivergent.
Absolutely.
All right, right on.
Cool.
Okay. We'll be right back.
Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.
And we're back. So, Mary Pat, before we went to the break, Ben, you were talking about a way that we could harness the I remember, like, I mentioned Jen Adelhart, one of our previous guests here, who just did a TEDx talk about her ADHD being her superpower, right? Um, and so, how can we, Ben? Can you put that in better terms for me?
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that I'm super curious about is that, Mary Pat, you were saying that there's this first thing that managers should understand, that there's a sort of neural spectrum that everyone is on, even themselves, and the impact of what happened that morning coming into work or your prior history is going to influence where you sit on any given day. And especially for people who are neurodiverse or neurodivergent, I should say, it would be helpful for managers, you were saying, to recognize that there's alternate ways that are not neurotypical for how people show up at work, and that recognizing that is the first step. And then the second step might be to understand some of the traits and hallmarks you were going through about how to see that someone might be neurodivergent. And then I think where it would be great, at least my mind is taking me to, okay, I understand that people have different neural wiring. I see someone has some kind of stimming behavior, or someone might be trying to mask that and they're working really hard to mask that. Or I see someone who has ADHD, or I think might have ADHD, is like really focused, but then just can't focus on anything I give them for the rest of the day. As a manager, how might I want to try to work with those people so that they stay engaged and motivated, and so that my company is able to harness all of the other skills that they bring to the table? I know that's a lot, so I'll stop, and
No,
wherever you
no.
want. That's great.
That's fine. No, I'm just sitting here thinking those are all awesome questions. And I love that as people who come from a business background, you are asking those questions. That means there's interest out there to make change. And that makes me feel great.
Oh, yeah, and I'm hearing it from a lot of places. It's not just the three of us.
That's great to hear. So we talked about number one. I think the first step is understanding, as I always say, the neuroscience of being human and understanding that nervous system. And as a manager, understanding yourself and how you react to things. And that's a lot of education and learning. And then moving on to the neurodivergent population. Number one, you have to get neurodivergent voices in on this discussion. Okay.
Mm.
So I do not have ADHD. At least I didn't for a long time. And and there are so many good, they have to be part of the discussion going forward. So I don't want to know I'm speaking the be all and end all. And so I think we have to get more knowledge about what it really looks like, um, and how it's individual from person to person. But there are some basics you can have in place, like the ability to move around when you're working, or adapt your way of working. If you need to go somewhere else, if you need to pace around your desk, if you need to tap a pencil or do something, but have to move so you don't bother somebody else. We have to, it's the same way in the classroom. I had to work very hard to get teachers to accept that they're not going to just sit at their desk and be listeners. Most of us don't operate that way. So acknowledging that is the first step. Number one. And number two is knowing what the conditions look like knowing that people with ADHD can have hyperfocus. Okay. That's what they call their superpower, where something interests them and grabs them. They're focused into it and they don't want to be bothered or disturbed. And that's a trait that autistic people can have. Another leaning of autistic people is to have a special interest. Okay. They used to call it a compulsion. It's not a compulsion. It's how their nervous system is wired. And that can be their superpower. And you can accommodate their special interest. You can, I think, and there are some places out there. I think this question is a question that is so valid, but needs to be opened up and discussed and worked on even more. But where you start with is realizing that different neurotypes are not necessarily bad. If you have someone
Mhm.
and you hire them and they come in and they don't really want to have lunch with everybody, well, it's not because they're antisocial. It could be because they are neurodivergent and they've been working all hard all morning in the sensory environment. Often you get a sensory overwhelm if you're neurodivergent, and they need a break from that. And that should be honored and respected and viewed with curiosity. So as a manager, I would advise at this point, be curious instead of judgmental.
Sure.
Why is this person acting differently? And not necessarily that you have to know why, but how can I help them? And here's the thing, they might not even know how you can help them. So by being curious, you can start the process. What type of environment do you work best in? If you know, you can add all your employees that and give them sensory things of the environment. Do you like low lights, high lights? Do you like sound? Some people with ADHD need 2 or 3 sounds in their background in order to work. And some people with autism prefer complete quiet or vice versa. Okay. But realizing everybody's individual, and there's absolutely information out there about how to look at your environment that way. And
Sure.
I would encourage you also, is everybody feel safe? What is your environment like from a felt safety perspective? And that's the best place to start because that's going to lead to your psychological safety. And that's a discussion too for another day because that goes a little bit under. There's things like voice that show whether we're feeling under threat. There's things like proximity, how close you stand to another person, that kind of thing. There's lots of elements to this. So I know that was a little bit of a roundabout answer to your question. I
No,
can't
it's
give
fascinating.
the fix at this point because, like I said, everybody's different. So it's
Yeah.
more having a global workplace policy.
Right. Right. No, and even just where you started, the whole idea of managers need to understand their own
Yeah,
origin and their own sense of self. I mean, it's like Shakespeare said, "Know thyself," right? So
right,
it's
Right.
and now
until
the
we,
environment.
yeah, no, it's great. And so that ties into a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of emotional intelligence and self-regulation and self-understanding and all of that. Just adds to the crazy puzzle that we have at work.
And one
Right.
really important thing when we use the word self-regulation or resilience, those things are not something we often choose to have. They are based in our nervous system. So when we say we're going to teach self-regulation or we're going to help somebody be self-regulated, you actually have to help them grow neural connections of feeling safe in an environment. So all those terms that are out there have an underlying neurological component that needs to be addressed if you're really going to help people continue to grow and thrive.
It's such a rich vein of
It
statement
is.
you just made there, Mary Pat, because this idea of self-regulation, authenticity, where is the energy that I am exerting to mask, right? There's a spectrum for every single one of those things. And what you just said is so important for us to understand. There's a certain surrender to this idea that there is a lack of choice in some of
Right.
those until you focus on building those reactions to elicit a chemical reaction if you can, right? That's not a easy or light thing, especially if you don't even know
Right.
it's happening.
And that's why this is why it's a hard switch in the schools. And I'm sure in businesses, our culture isn't set up that way. Our culture is pretty much compliance based, whether it's at work, whether it's at school. We're not set up to look at things from a point of connection and from a point of felt safety and things like that. It's really hard to switch people's viewpoint on that. So hopefully with knowledge, we can.
And the key word there, curiosity, together, right?
Absolutely.
I love when you said that. If you're in a room and you don't know how to react and everything that you know seems to be going sideways, keep that curiosity in that room to keep that safety. Let everyone know you are curious to
Nervous
learn about
system
them
feels
and you
the
want them
judgment.
to engage with you to see. Yeah. And everything And
Neurodivergent people, from the minute they enter the school system, now they learn differently. And it starts a shame cycle at a very young age. And so we don't want to contribute to the shame cycle. So approaching it with curiosity rather than judgment, you can absolutely help every employee and yourself. You will use that same philosophy yourself. If you come in dysregulated and you bark at an employee when you don't want to, instead of being judgmental about that, be curious. Why did I do that? Have compassion for yourself.
That's lovely. I love how you had mentioned, actually, I think it was in the break. I don't think we actually talked about it, but how you said that um the teacher, when you're in the school, it's the teacher that makes the difference, right? And then in the workplace, we have plenty of studies. We have a white paper that on signaling that highlights a bunch of this, where it's the manager, the relationship with the manager. Gallup's State of the Global Workforce poll says was 70% of somebody's job satisfaction is related to their manager, right? So being able to adequately accommodate the needs of that population, it seems like it would make for a stronger workforce.
Right. And giving people strategies too. So very simply, if you're that manager that's dysregulated, number one, identify your own dysregulation. Number two, you pause and stop. And when you pause and stop, your body takes over. It's designed to regulate you again. But just simply take, like, if you bark at that employee and say, oh my God, I didn't want to say that. And you stop, you take a breath, you've already broken the neurological cycle, and your employee's nervous system will feel that as well. So there's a lot of strategies we can help employers and employees put into place on
That's
going
great.
from this framework.
I'm working on something, right, Pat, that I am going to call psychological neutrality, and it has everything to do with this regulation, but not in a way that is masking, and also is grounded in emotional intelligence, which is another huge buzzword, and everybody's kicking that around. But it comes down to, the breathing, the pausing, that moment that you take can make all the difference to
Yes.
first reassess and reset.
Absolutely. Sure.
Mary Pat, we're coming up to the end of the hour here, and so how can people get in contact with you, and how can they engage you in your in Flip the Switch?
Well, at this point, my social media presence is small. So you can reach out to either on my website, which is fliptheswitchot.com, or you can email me at fliptheswitchot@gmail.com. I am on LinkedIn under Mary Pat Kochenash, but my presence there is still small. I'm working on it.
All right, right
That-
on. But you're there.
Best way is email.
All right, right on. And that's Flip the Switch OT, right? And OT
Yes.
for
They're-
occupational therapy.
Yes.
Right
I
on.
will always be an occupational therapist at heart. All that I do comes from what I know as an OT. So
That's great. Awesome.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This has been
Thank you,
a
Mary
real
Pat.
pleasure.
This has been great. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
You know,
Margaret.
I'll tell you what. I'm just going to say this. I think that there's going to be a Hermie cartoon. For those who don't know, this guy, right? On those four fight or flight, freeze or fawn, I can just see
Yeah.
some
absolutely.
illustration of that. That's
And I do want to touch back on fawn briefly, in a clinical setting, when you have a whole family dynamic of, parents and young people in a room, and you see that idea that fawning has been articulated recently, it helps people pleasers everywhere, because
Yes.
we walk into a room and we think that we're being empathic. We see what people need. We're going to accommodate things, when it means that we have zero boundaries.
Right.
It's another way to identify that.
Absolutely.
Help us.
They're a teacher's dream, but they don't realize that it's not necessarily healthy for the job
Yeah.
right.
or
So
the employee.
thank you for bringing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, guys. Thanks for your questions. They were awesome.
All right. Well, listeners, thanks for joining us for the Harmonious Workplaces podcast again. And until we meet the next time, make change your friend.
Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.